All right, everyone, welcome back to the show. We are just on the other side of October, as I mentioned in that first segment, which means that a lot of families are starting to think about those early decision deadlines. We've got about a month before November 1st, another month and a half before November 15th. Those are the most common deadlines for early decision one. And there are a lot of considerations that families might want to wrestle with as they're deciding whether to apply early decision. And we don't want to forget the importance of the financial picture here. In some ways, it is one of the most important questions that families can wrestle with as they're considering an ED option. So we decided to call our experts over in the college finance team at College Coach. They've sent us Alex Gonzalez. Hey, Alex, welcome back to the show.
Oh, thanks for letting me be here. Yeah.
Glad you're here. This is something I think I've talked about before. I want to say like 6 or 7 years ago with our former colleague, Kathy Ruby, but it is something that I think we need to bring up every year because for every new family, early decision is a new decision. It's not something that they've ever engaged with before. And there are understandably some big questions around financial aid because you're committed to that institution if you're admitted. And there's a big question about,
Oh, yeah.
well, what happens with the financial piece?
And committed for 4 years. So oftentimes you're back in school, you're kind of squeezing those decisions, as a high school senior, and you forget that you are going to be at an institution paying for that institution for 4 years. And so financial aid and your ability to pay really does come into effect. So, yeah.
That's right. And usually as an admissions expert, I'll tell people if we have any uncertainty here, if we've had any concerns that are significant, then usually ED is not going to be right for you. But I think we want to talk a little bit about families that are thinking, all right, I got to understand this picture. I got to figure out how these different things fall into place. And let's start with, we've got need-based aid and we've got recruitment aid or merit aid. Let's start with need-based financial aid. What might be different for a student applying early decision in a need-based aid landscape versus a student applying regular decision?
Yeah, and a need-based financial aid there might not be a whole lot of difference. It is an application that's more numbers based, so household size, income, assets, wealth. What we need to be mindful of, though, is that there might be some deadlines that we need to meet on that financial aid end as well,
Yeah.
and each school will have different policies to determine when they need that application. So it could be very tight or close to the admissions application or that early deadline, or a little bit later as well. And there which forms to use as well.
Yeah.
So the financial aid forms, the free application for federal student aid, or the FAFSA. There might be an additional form called a CSS profile, which is an expanded version. And then also just be mindful is that there might be university-based um, um, forms, in particular for this year, because the FAFSA is going to be
Wondering
uh,
about
made
this.
made available in December, and so we are kind of have our radar out on determining which schools might require an additional form or some additional information.
It's really important to ensure that you fill out all of the required forms. I recall from my time in admission, there were some families that would start filling out a form and they would be expecting a particular kind of aid and they would just decide, oh, this actually isn't going to be enough. We're not going to qualify. So we're just not going to submit forms. But they had indicated on the application that they wanted to apply for financial aid. Those were families that were going to be able to afford the full tuition. We would admit them and then they would be able to, for ED, cover the cost. But there were some other families that checked yes, that they want to apply for aid, that submitted the FAFSA and didn't submit the CSS profile, which we also required. And those families might look like the ones that just said, we're not going to submit the forms because we're not going to qualify. Those students might be admitted, and they're in a situation where they maybe can't afford to attend the institution without that financial aid. So you've got to fill out and complete and
Oh,
submit all the forms.
yeah, and I understand the anxiety there. You've talked about, an ED might be a good choice if this school's reach or
Yeah.
competitive, and so there is some anxiety there. But most colleges on need-based financial aid are going to have a policy of need blind. So that information is going, I remind folks that that information is going to the financial aid office. Your admissions application is going to the admissions office. And so those are, are separate departments evaluating based on the information that they have. And that financial aid package or need-based financial aid isn't going to be evaluated until you are admitted into the university. So oftentimes not considered in that
And
admissions process.
and so just to be clear, you alluded to this in your response before, but the FAFSA is not actually available until December of this year, right?
Correct. Correct. So
How does that
December,
work? How are they going to be able to get decisions out with financial aid offers for ED this year?
yeah. Well, and that, so much like what you can do to kind of prepare yourself of whether or not you're eligible for need-based financial aid at that college. So outside of just kind of saying, I assume that I earn too much and I'm not going to receive, is that you could go to the college's financial aid office and review a net price calculator. That'll be kind of an idea of what type of need-based financial aid that they have to offer, whether that's federal, state, and primarily institutional financial aid. And so you could do a net price calculator at through the FAFSA or through a general form, and they're only going to really be able to tell you about, do you qualify for federal financial aid? Well, institutional financial aid is a lot bigger because their cost of attendance is higher. That's going to increase the amount of families that might be eligible for that type of financial aid. In addition to that, it could be free aid, it could be work study programs that you would be eligible for, or federal student loan programs. So there's a wide variety of different types of financial aid that come from that form. December is going to be a lot later than your October, November of when those typical deadlines are going to be available. They're going to give you estimations. And so making sure that you fill out that CSS profile, that is open in October and November of this year.
Okay.
That provides a lot of similar information to give you a context. I polled my colleagues as well, and knowing that that information isn't going to be made available or very close to your decision, is that it is okay. There is, if you do know that if you can't afford it, you do have some options to say, this is what was far out of my estimation, even though the ED is kind of a contract or an agreement that you will
Right.
attend.
Right.
It is an estimate that a university is presenting, and so you do have maybe a shorter decision time frame of saying I can't attend.
Yeah. I always say for families that the process that you're describing is really a process of due diligence to say, I'm looking at the net price calculator, I'm making an estimate, I have a sense for what kind of scholarships I might qualify for, and we expect we're going to need to pay X. If you've checked those boxes and looked at that information, and then the school comes back and they say, well, actually, we need you to pay Y, and it's a lot higher than X, you can go to that school and say, you know what, this is not meeting my expectations. I love this institution, but now it's become a financial hardship for me to engage. But if you just say, you know, we're kind of hoping that they're going to give us scholarships and apply ED, and then you don't get what you were just hoping for, you don't have really a leg to stand on when you're going to that school to appeal that financial aid decision and talk through that ED agreement.
Definitely do your homework. Do meet those deadlines, because that's when you can start having those conversations. I remember being in a financial aid office, and if I didn't have that information, I couldn't have those conversations.
Right.
Those deadlines were passed, or I couldn't look at a family's dynamic, special circumstances, because that information wasn't presented.
The more information financial aid officers have, the more they can help you.
Yeah.
Now, one of the big question marks, Alex, is with merit scholarships. And I would say that this is a question that I get maybe once a month, but especially picks up in the fall of what is the incentive for a college to offer me a merit scholarship if I'm applying ED? They know I'm committed to attend. We often think about merit scholarships as being an incentive to choose a school. So why wouldn't a school just say, you know what, we're not going to give you a merit scholarship because we've got you. You're already on the hook.
Mhm.
What kind of response do you give to families that are concerned about that practice?
Yeah, I think this is a big decision. You're committing, you're kind of narrowing your focus and opportunity to one particular school's policy. Um, Most or some college might automatically consider you for merit-based scholarships regardless of when you what type of application, whether it's ED or early action or regular decision, but policies can vary.
Yeah.
um Reminder of like context. I'm sure you have uh, contextual conversations about, okay, so this is a reach school. This is a challenging school to get into. In general, that means that they might have a less healthy scholarship program. So
Yeah.
if you're kind of comparing yourself to peers that applied last year in regular decision or had or if there was an older sibling that was able to compare between multiple offers from multiple universities, you've kind of narrowed your decision tree or opportunities to one school. And so you're kind of like your only opportunity is within that window.
Right. You're beholden to their policies. There's not an
Yeah,
opportunity to go somewhere else that might have better policies. And
correct.
if it's your ED school, you love that school from the academic perspective, but you can't change the financial piece of the
Cor-
puzzle.
Correct. Or sometimes there are things that are out of your control. I've worked at universities that have had kind of a rubric of you're competing against yourself for those scholarships. If you meet these certain markers or attributes, you might receive that scholarship. In other universities that I've worked at, that it might be that you're competing against the pool of applicants.
Hmm.
And that's a variable you don't have necessarily control over year to year. Where do you fit in that applicant pool? You might have likelihood of being admitted because you've shown interest and you've made this leap of faith. But from the scholarship standpoint, you might be kind of in the middle, where at other universities, at other times, other years that you applied, you might have been that you might have meted and exceeded the expectations. So yeah, there's a
Yeah.
lot of to weigh when we're making that decision, especially with merit, because it is so contextual to the school itself and their policy, and then maybe the applicant pool that particular year.
One thing we can say for sure is an ED school that does not offer merit scholarships will not show up with unexpected money. It's
Correct.
just not going to happen, right? So there will not be a lightning strike that all of a sudden you get $10,000 from a
Yeah.
school that doesn't otherwise offer these scholarships. There are schools that my understanding is based on certain thresholds, they automatically offer scholarships to certain test scores or to academic achievement, GPA, et cetera. Those are things that you can count on no matter whether you apply ED, RD, or EA. But you're saying if there's uncertainty, it's a good idea to just reach out to the admission office to get a clearer picture before you sign that ED form and submit, because you're in a better position to have that conversation now than you are on the other side.
Correct. Correct.
Let's get to that other side for circumstances where this does come up. I think it's not
Yeah.
something that if you've if you've covered all your bases, the likelihood that this happens goes down pretty significantly. But I do think it still does happen to a family that's applying in good faith with expectations about college finance, financial aid helping to meet their objectives. What do you do if you're in a position where you can't afford a school based on the package that they've offered and you're in this ED commitment?
Yeah, yeah. You do have kind of a smaller window of decision. Just like you're applying early, you have kind of an abbreviated window to decide to commit to that university. And so making sure that you have your financial aid forms in, that you are communicating that that's a concern early rather than later in that window, so that you can have the context of what future decisions look like. But and in particularly this particular year, and it's only for this year that FAFSA is um, um, going to be open in December and
Yeah.
January,
Yeah.
is that it is an estimate that universities are utilizing. And so that does give you a little bit of agency to kind of say, okay, we didn't really expect that. This is a commitment that beyond 4 years, universities don't want to see or wants to see your student there for the 4 years as well. And so if it's just out of reach, then then yes, you can say no, um, and kind of move through the process from there.
And it's worth acknowledging that significant changes in family financial circumstances, especially those that might have happened within this current year or prior year, given the FAFSA doesn't capture that, that's all information that you might be able to communicate to a financial aid office in order to make things work, right? Because if you're admitted to a school, ultimately they want to figure out a way to make education affordable for you. And I think the thing that I always love about this, I say this, I think every time we have a college finance expert on the show, is financial aid folks want to help people to afford education. Pick up the phone, make a call, see if you can ask questions that are going to help you get a better understanding of what to expect.
Oh, definitely. Meet those deadlines. So helping us
hit the
help
deadlines.
meet the deadlines. Meet
That's
the
right.
deadlines, and provide that. Don't make those decisions for yourself by providing that information. Just and responding early just makes that context and that ability to have that relationship so much easier.
Perfect. Well, it is still early October, and so folks can hit those deadlines. And if you have anything to share with your friends and family, remind them deadlines are important when it comes both to admission and to financial aid. Alex, thanks for coming on the show. Appreciate your guidance as always.
Oh, thank you. Anytime.
All right. When we come back, we're going to talk about how to continue to breathe all the way through this process. Don't go away.